All right, today we're tackling a real mindbender from one of the most important texts in Zen Buddhism, the Diamond Sutra. It's this one statement that sounds, well, completely impossible. It seems to just break logic. But stick with me, because it might just change how you see, well, everything. So here's the big question, the one that's at the heart of this whole thing. It just seems to defy all logic, right? This is what's known as a koan. It's like a puzzle that's not meant to be solved with your normal, everyday brain. It's designed to stop your thinking mind right in its tracks and maybe, just maybe, open you up to a totally different way of seeing. So where on earth does an idea this bizarre even come from?
Well, it comes straight from the source, the sutra itself. The Buddha says that this whole vast universe, what he calls the 3,000 great thousand worlds, is, get this, not a world. And that's exactly why we call it a world. I know, it sounds like a total contradiction. But believe it or not, that's the key. That's the door to a really profound insight. So how in the world do we start to unravel this riddle? Well, the Buddha doesn't just give you a straight answer. That would be too easy. Instead, he uses this absolutely brilliant analogy to kind of shift our whole perspective. He asks us to imagine something pretty wild, taking the entire universe and just shattering it into the smallest possible pieces. Okay, so he poses this thought experiment. Imagine you could grind down the entire cosmos into this infinite cloud of tiny particles, what he calls microdust. Now, he asks a simple question. Would you say that this collection of dust particles is many? I mean, the obvious answer is, yeah, of course it is, right? But that simple yes is exactly where our normal way of thinking starts to fall apart.
Okay, so let's break this analogy down. On one side, you've got the world, which stands for the whole thing, this single, unified reality. And on the other, you have the microdust, which represents all the individual parts. And here's the absolute kicker, the most crucial point. They completely depend on each other. You literally cannot have the particles of dust without the world they came from. And you can't have the world without the particles that make it up. They're not separate things at all. They're basically creating each other in every moment.
Now, to really get a handle on this idea of interdependence, the sutra uses this very specific, let's call it a philosophical tool. It's a kind of logical formula that pops up over and over again, and its entire purpose is to take our rigid, normal way of thinking and just dismantle it.
This tool is called the not-is principle, and it's a really powerful formula for a simple but profound idea. The label we stick on something is not the thing itself. You know, the name is just a convenient shortcut we use, but reality is way more fluid and interconnected than our simple words can ever hope to capture. So let's see exactly how this thing works. Okay, step one is super simple. The formula starts just by stating the conventional name we use for something. So in our example, microdust. But then, right away, here comes the twist. The formula immediately turns around and negates it. It says microdust is not microdust. And you're probably thinking, what? Why? Well, because it has no fixed independent identity of its own. It only exists because of the universe it's a part of. And finally, the formula lands on a really practical point. Therefore, it is called microdust. See? We use the name just so we can talk to each other about it, even though we now understand it's not some separate, permanent thing. And the same logic, this A is not A, therefore it is called A, applies to the world just as much as it applies to the dust. And this simple three-step process reveals the core insight of the whole thing. We get trapped by our own words. It's like we mistake the menu for the meal, or the map for the actual territory. The Diamond Sutra is trying to snap us out of that habit. It wants to show us that reality isn't a collection of static objects with neat little labels. It's a dynamic, constantly flowing, interconnected process. Okay, so this logic doesn't just stop with dust particles and worlds, no way. It scales all the way up to the very idea of a single unified reality. You know, that big whole that our minds are always trying to wrap themselves around. The sutra actually has a term for this idea of a unified whole. It's called a composite form. And really, that's just the mental concept we create of any single solid thing. Doesn't matter if it's a chair, a person, or the entire universe. And here's the problem with that. The sutra tells us that this unified reality is ultimately inexpressible. You can't capture it with words or ideas. It's just beyond that. But we, as ordinary people, we get attached to our mental pictures of it.
We cling so tightly to our ideas of what the world is, and according to this way of thinking, that very clinging, that's a major source of our suffering. So to break this attachment, later philosophers took this not-is principle and, well, they turned it up to 11. They developed it into this incredibly thorough, systematic way to deconstruct literally every possible concept you could ever come up with. And the goal here was seriously radical. We're talking about achieving total mental freedom by systematically taking apart every single concept. The whole idea was to create a process for the mind to untangle itself from the traps that it sets for itself. So here's how it works, more or less. First, you start with 4 really basic ideas about anything. It is not, it is one thing, it is many things. Simple enough. Next, you go through and systematically negate all of those. Then, and this is where it gets pretty wild, you start combining the positive and negative statements, and then you negate those new combinations. And just to be extra thorough, you apply this entire logical matrix across time, past, present, and future. So you've covered every conceivable angle. What you end up with after this rigorous process is 100 distinct logical positions. This is what's known as the 100 negations. And that number, 100, isn't just random. It's meant to be symbolic of a complete set of covering every single conceptual box the mind could possibly invent. And the ultimate point of all this? To show you that not a single one of those boxes can actually hold reality. So, you see, the crucial point here is that this entire complex, logical exercise is designed to lead you to its own breaking point. It's like a ladder. You use it to climb up, but once you get to the top, you kick it away. The whole goal is to arrive at a direct experience of reality, one that is totally beyond words and beyond any kind of intellectual thought. Okay, so after that pretty wild journey through a cosmic riddle, what's the bottom line? What does all this ancient logic actually mean for you, sitting here right now? Well, for starters, it's about remembering that a name isn't the thing itself. It's just a label, a pointer. It's also about seeing that reality isn't just a bunch of separate objects, but this incredible interconnected web where everything relies on everything else. It reminds us that our own language, as useful as it is, can sometimes trap our perception. And maybe, most importantly, this not-is logic isn't just some ancient brain teaser. It's a practical tool, a tool you can use to question your own assumptions and start seeing the world in a completely new light. So, I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. Just look at your own life, your beliefs, your idea of who you are, the world around you. What are the things you take for granted as being solid and real, just because they have a name? And what do you think might happen if you started to see them not as fixed, separate things, but as constantly changing parts of one vast, interconnected whole?